Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay and the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
And we welcome you to this edition of the Black Gold Banneret Podcast. I'm Eric Lopez. Jeff Sharon is off this week. He's actually moving to a new house. We cannot confirm or deny that the reason why he's moving to a new house is because he lost his old house on a bet on the UCF football game at Tulsa. But I'm glad to report that Brian Murphy is with us on this episode, back from Tulsa, safe and sound. Murph, how you doing?
Good, Elo, and I will say that as anybody who listened to last week's show would know, I did put up a couple of wheelchairs up on the block in this game in Tulsa. I was able to get them back and make it home safely, but you do not want to know what I had to go through to get these wheelchairs back.
No, we don't. That's probably for the best. Coming up on this edition, we'll recap. Yes. We'll share our thoughts, kind of the post-mortem now. We've UCF football losing to Tulsa. They're on a bye week. What's next as they try to finish up the season? I'll ask Brian, what's the most underplayed angle from that game? What's the most overplayed angle from that game? We're just kind of keep it there because by now we've heard everybody complain and et cetera. Also, we'll talk UCF basketball. Me and Murph were at the men's game against Miami on Tuesday night. Miami won that by 9. The men's team is 1-1. What have we learned through 80 minutes of the 2019-2020 UCF men's basketball season? Obviously, later in the program, I'm going to recap the men's soccer semifinals in Orlando, UCF Temple. We're going to hope to have a guest on from Top Drawer Soccer, Travis Clark, back with us. Where does UCF men's soccer stand with selection Monday upon us there, as well as some of the Olympic sports going on at wrap there. And, of course, I will be misleading. It is the final weekend of fall ball and baseball and softball, so me and Murph have to touch on that as well. So that's a no-brainer, yes. Right? I mean, we got to end on a high note.
It's our duty as baseball, softball enthusiasts.
Yeah, we might just have to, trade questions or something. I don't know what we'll do, but you can follow us. You can follow us at UCF_Banneret on Twitter and like us as well on Facebook. And, of course, check out blackandgoldbanneret.com for all the latest in UCF, including many great articles from Mr. Brian Murphy, including his recap from Tulsa. Of course, that's where we'll begin. UCF losing to Tulsa on Friday night, 34-31. They're now 7-3. They're heading into the bye. We're not going to recap the game. You all saw the game. You've vented your frustrations on social media across the board and everything like that. Murph, you were there. You've had almost now a week to kind of digest it. You've written the recap about it. You've talked to coaches and players about it in not only that night but the days since. As you look back on that, even the rest, the next indefinite period of time, what stands out to you now that you've had a little time to think about it? What's the biggest takeaway you have from that Tulsa game?
It's just amazing to me, and Eric, we can probably go back and forth on this topic because the penalties this team has created, it goes back further than just the season. However, it is amazing to me how many penalties this team is called for in which aren't in the flow of the play. And this was really the crux of my story following the game, in that there were so many penalties in this game, 15 for 120, which was season high in terms of accepted penalties. But so many of them, too, were like false starts or post-play stuff, personal fouls. Obviously, you had the last play of the game, which was the too many men on the field, which, by the way, they actually had 13 men on the field on that play, not just 12. They had 13 men on the field on that play, which is just mind-boggling. But how this keeps happening is really hard to sort of like digest and really diagnose, other than just like it's a really undisciplined team, which, I mean, obviously that you had to point to the coaches on that. Like, this is an undisciplined team, which is sort of nuts to say about a team that is this talented, that they can create so many mistakes that just shoot themselves in the foot.
And really, and you wrote about this, so I won't give it away completely away, but you talked about if you look at the box scores and you did a lot of the stuff they did would suggest they did enough to win the game. They held Tulsa's star player, Keelan Stokes, to just 2 catches for 47 yards. To me, the interesting liner you used in there, the Knights still lost. In the end, they beat the wrong team, which is a pretty clever line. And Heupel addressed that afterwards and things. Here's the problem, right? Like this is nothing new, like you said. Even like since Scott Frost's first year, UCF has been penalized a lot. The difference is there's not as much room for error now than there was, say, like 2017, right? Murph, you were there in 2017. You can commit 9 penalties. Right. It doesn't matter if you're up 3-4 touchdowns. Nobody cares. The problem is that margin for error has been reduced big time for various reasons that we can get into. And as a result now, those penalties are now more emphasized big time now, as we saw in the Tulsa game, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you have a lesser margin for error. You have, I would say, certainly there's been a quarterback downgrade. I mean, Dylan Gabriel is great, but he is not 2017 era McKenzie Milton. He is not. And he is learning still as a freshman on the job. And in these 3 losses, Eric, it's amazing how his mistakes lead almost directly to UCF losses. He has only thrown interceptions in 3 games this year. And in those 3 games, UCF has lost all of them. In their 7 wins, he has not thrown an interception, which is just kind of nuts. And you can say it's low-hanging fruit and it's sort of fluky, but it just shows you that when he plays poorly, and it's not just him, there's other things that force him to play poorly, and we'll get into that too. But when he makes mistakes, it sinks this team with it.
Let me ask you this. There's been a lot of chatter across Knight Nation through social media. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure you've been thrown with a bunch of questions from Knight fans. Message boards have been blowing up and all that. And obviously, by the way, it's very normal. I know people are kind of like, oh, my goodness, I can't believe how upset they are. Well, listen, go to any college football team on a Saturday when they lose a game. Like, go to an Alabama message boards. Trust me, it's not pretty right now. And then, that's probably the number 1 program in the last decade dynasty. And yet I saw people saying, man, Nick Saban's probably time for him to go after the LSU loss. So spare me on everybody that's, like, freaking out over everybody's freaking out. Like, that's college football in a nutshell. So I don't get caught up in that. But let me what is, of all the talk that you've heard and seen, read, because there's been columns written and some of it is interesting, but nonetheless, what has been the most, in your opinion, the most underplayed angle, story from this game or even this season, and what's been the most overplayed that people are making way too much out of it, either way there?
Well, I don't know how it's overplayed or underplayed. I will say that what is kind of amazing to me coming out of this game that I guess not enough people could be talking about, because I think we're all talking about the penalties because there were so many of them and they were so influential on really the decisive play of the game. So we got that. Certainly we're talking about Dylan's turnovers because he's the quarterback, and when he makes mistakes, especially his second interception, which was a ball that he's trying to throw out of bounds, and yet he throws it in bounds. Like, it makes no sense. So we got that. But this offensive line, which, I mean, there are some new pieces here, but for most part, it's a very veteran, experienced offensive line. They have now ceded 22 sacks this season. In the 3 losses, they have ceded 15 of those 22 sacks. They were sacked 6 times each against Tulsa and Pitt, 3 times in Cincinnati. And I don't know, again, what happens there to cause this good offensive line to look really just get run roughshod over in these losses, but they have massive breakdowns that not only affect Dylan and cause him to make decisions that lead to these turnovers, but it hampers the running game, which after Killens' 57-yard touchdown, you didn't really see much of that against a bad run defense. You didn't see them really be able to run the ball successfully after halftime. What happens there? I think that is something that I don't know if there's a clear answer to it, and I don't know if we're going to get one, even if we ask hard enough. But it's nuts how this offensive line has been completely overwhelmed in their 3 losses.
No, and especially when some people were talking about maybe being best offensive line they've had there, and that was the kind of talk coming out of camp and things. Let me kind of give a couple, maybe throw out a couple theories why, and see if you agree with it, disagree, you think it's valid, not valid. They lost, Wyatt Miller graduated, right? No Evans in that line. Did we just I've always been told about this from coaches that offensive line, a lot of it is about chemistry. A lot of it is about cohesiveness. Everybody fits. And, is it one of those things where, you lose a couple of guys you may not think are big deals, but those are clogs, and now there's some adjustments being made, and maybe this line is just not as good as we thought, and maybe there's been some drop-offs there.
I mean, there's some drop-offs, certainly, but you would imagine with a crew that, for a few of these guys have been here for at least 2 years. I mean, obviously, Cole Schneider and Jake Brown and Jordan Johnson and Jake Brown are seniors. They've been here a long time. Cole Schneider's in his second year. He's a freshman. He was really a freshman, I think, All-American last year. Parker Boudreaux, it's his second year in the system. Sam Jackson has been playing. He didn't play much last year because of a knee injury, but he's been here for 3 years. I mean, really, the only kind of quote-unquote new guy who's playing a lot is Ed Collins over at tackle. But this should not be happening a lot with this offensive line. There's miscommunications. There's a ton of false starts. I mean, really, just like penalties that make you like shake your head and you're like, where is this coming from? Because you did not see this before in years past with this offensive line where they're making this many mistakes consistently. And it's just funny how it seems like how they go sort of dictates how the offense goes. And when they play poorly, UCF's probably going to lose.
Well, and that brings up the other point. I wonder, McKenzie Milton, one of the abilities that I think maybe we underappreciated was if there was pressure around him, he was a guy that could elude it. He would elude the pocket. He could get out of the pocket quick. He had that instinct to just take the right step, right, to get out of, and that part of his experience. He, obviously, especially in his sophomore and junior year, he would get out of the pocket. Whereas I kind of feel like Dylan kind of stays in the pocket. And there was one sack in particular where he kind of felt the pressure and he didn't know. I felt like he was still unsure what to do. Like he was concerned more about the pressure around him, and he really didn't know how to get out. And I think we've learned that Dylan Gabriel, while he might be mobile, and certainly maybe in a year or two we'll find out that maybe he's more comfortable being mobile, he's not as mobile as Milton, and maybe that's also contributed to some of these sacks because maybe Dylan is either staying in the pocket too long or he's maybe holding on to the ball too much. Is that a part of this too with a freshman quarterback?
It is a part of it, and he is not the scrambler that Milton is. And I know people will say, who is the scrambler is Darryl Mack. And if we've got a quarterback behind a leaky offensive line, maybe we need to play the running quarterback more, the guy who's able to get out of the pocket more to avoid those sacks. But I think that's sort of that's a net zero. It's a sum zero because I feel like you still have your best chance to win with Dylan Gabriel. And I know people will say, how can that be when you look at the mistakes he's made? He's still the best. I think he's still the best quarterback on this team. He's still the best thrower on this team of the football. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But he does, I think, his processing time is not where you would like it to be, even as a freshman. He does read the field a little slowly at times, even though most of the plays are like half-field reads. He does hold on to the ball a little longer than you would like. But really, I think most of it is just on the offensive line getting beat. Like, they just get beat, and they give up rushers. Like, Tulsa came into this game with 7 sacks on the season, and they got 6 against UCF.
Yeah, that's just unbelievable.
I think it's really about the O-line just miscommunicating. And we talked about this before with them after the Pitt game and the Cincinnati game, like what's going on, what's happening. And, some guys talked about how, they need to strain more and fight more through the play. And that sort of sounds like, some guys were kind of giving up and not giving full effort. So that could be an issue. I don't know, but whatever it is, there are massive things wrong with this offensive line, which were totally out of the blue, considering, again, the expectations we had for it coming into the year.
And that's so imperative. It's imperative in football in general. I mean, the offensive line is there's no stats for it, but if your offensive line's not playing well, it's going to be hard. And I remember when Scott Frost was here, that was a big thing, and they always said, and I think even George O'Leary may have said it during his time, the skill position nobody questions. You could always get skill positions at places like UCF here. Like, that was never a question. The question is, can you get a quality line to play? And I think we saw that in 2017 and 2018. What a getting good play out of the offensive line would open up things for your playmakers. And when you don't have that, which is clearly, I think they don't have that this year, I think you've seen some of these faults. I mean, and I don't care what kind of play calling you do. If your offensive line ain't playing well, you could call the greatest play call ever, and it's not going to work, right?
Right, exactly.
So where do we go from here? What do you, there's a bye week. I don't believe, do you not agree with me? At this point in the year, you are who you are. I don't think whatever issues you have, it's hard to fix at this point, in my opinion. I'm sure there's maybe exceptions to the rule, but we're so late in the year. This is basically who they are. So,
correct.
With that in mind, what do you expect to see? How do they finish this year on a positive note?
I mean, look. So we got to talk to the guys today, Wednesday. We get to talk to Coach Heupel, secondary coach Willie Martinez, a couple of the defensive players. And they're all saying the right things, they got to finish strong, and, the energy on the practice field this week's been great, and the guys, are bonded together, and they want to go out there and win these last couple games. But the fact is that this team has major flaws that pop up consistently, and for some reason, they pop up on the road. Now, it's amazing how the further we get out from the Temple game, how that looks like a complete outlier, because that Temple game just does not fit, when you mix in the Cincy game, the Pitt game, and the Tulsa game. So, I mean, that is that is the weirder result than these last two games, because these last two games are more in line with how this team has performed on the road.
Right.
And so, with that being said, if I'm a UCF fan, I am very nervous heading into this Tulane game. I mean, if you get pushed around by Tulsa defensively, what are you going to do against Tulane, who has a pretty good defense and is a much better team overall? This is worrisome. So they can come out and say they want to win these last three games, the last two, and then the bowl game, and they want to do this and win 10 games. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they come out of this bye. If they're motivated to come out of this bye and win these games, knowing that the conference championship is totally out of the picture, knowing that they're going to some also ran bowl game, and how they play. Because I fear it could look a lot like what we just saw.
UCF's 1-4 in games decided by 8 points or less the last 2 years. That one win was at Memphis in the regular season, 31-30. In contrast, they were 4-0 in games decided by 8 points or less in 2017. Obviously, the year they went perfect. Is that just random, or is there something there, Murph?
No, I think there's something there, I think there's something there only because the players have talked about it. The players have talked about how this program has not played in a lot of close games, and when they do, they've been able to find their way out of it. But now that they're playing in close games without McKenzie Milton, they have we talked about the lesser room for error. So you're not blowing as many people out anymore, and so they are stuck in these one possession games that I feel like they just do not have enough experience in, and I think that's showing up. And I wouldn't say that if the players didn't bring it up, but the players have brought it up, so I do think that is an issue.
Well, and that's tough to prepare for. I mean, you could practice all scenarios you want until you've been through it. It's kind of hard to and let's be honest, a lot of times close games, you got to kind of catch some breaks. I mean, they caught some breaks in that Memphis win on the road, and you could argue they caught some bad breaks on some of these losses on the road.
Right. It all evens out, right? Like, right. I mean, they should have lost at Memphis in 20. I forgot what it was already. 2018. Yeah, no, they should have lost that game in Memphis. Memphis was up 30 to 14, 30 to 17 going into the half. and they put Darrell Henderson into a shell in the second half of that game. And then they should have lost the conference championship game last year where Henderson looked like Herschel Walker and then apparently hurt his hand early in the second half, and then Memphis collapsed again. They should have lost both those games. I mean, they really should have. So this is sort of like, this is sort of the regression to the mean in terms of luck. You just have some luck in which now they're having some bad luck, and you have a couple of games here that you should have won. I mean, they should have won the Pitt game because there's a penalty there on 4th and 5 on the ultimate drive of the game that gives Pittsburgh new life, that leads to a touchdown. I think they were outplayed by Cincinnati, but they should have won at least the Pitt and the Tulsa game, certainly. But again, they do stupid things, and it comes back to bite them. And overall, they don't end up on the right side. And it sort of feels like, this is sort of the football god saying, well, you had those other seasons in which everything went your way. Well, not everything's going their way this year, and they got a couple losses to show for it.
Two things before we move on. Nate Evans, obviously, the situation there, going at it with the teammate on the field and things like that. What's your thoughts on that? Since if I don't ask you, people will be like, why did you ask Brian that? So here you are. There you go. I'm asking you the question about Nate Evans. So your thoughts? I know he spoke about it after the game. Your whole thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was weird, right? Like, it's fine that we see teams arguing on the sidelines, and get frustrated with each other when things are going wrong. But we have not seen this team actively yell and scream and come almost to blows with each other on the field. And that's almost what happened in Tulsa with Kenny Stunier was on the ground after a play. He was lying on his back. Neville Clark comes over to look at him, and so does Nate Evans. And Nate sees Kenny on the ground and then just starts yelling in his face. It looks like he's yelling at him to get up. Kenny gets up, kind of charges at Nate. They clash helmets. You got Heupel on the field trying to break it up. There was some massive frustration on the field. Now, since then, everyone has downplayed it. Nate said, that's just brothers fight. There's frustration. It's a competitive game. That's what happens sometimes. William Martinez said the same thing today about, there's always frustration. Even in practice, guys will start yelling at each other. I mean, we don't see it because we're not at practice every day, but it happens a lot more than we think. Sure, that's fine. I get that. But still, we don't see that. We don't see this team going after each other on the field. And so that was rare, but everyone says it was just a one-time thing and it was just frustration and we're all past it.
Well, and I kind of buy that from this standpoint, Brian. This team, a lot of these players haven't suffered a loss, right? It's not like, hey, we lost a game last year or two. This is what we do. Like, what do? We lost. They're not accustomed to this situation, and all of a sudden you're in a tight battle with a 2-7 team. You're probably a little frustrated. You're probably internally thinking, why haven't we blown this team out? Maybe there was, maybe Nate thought that the players was not legit hurt. Maybe they thought they were flopping because there is more and more, and I've said this, and Jeff hates to hear this, but because almost every team goes no huddle and spreads, I think you're seeing more and more teams kind of, quote, flop and fake injuries. Would you agree with that? I mean, we've seen that. Teams do that against UCF.
Maybe. Yeah. Oh, yeah, teams do it against UCF. Yeah. I will say, so when we asked Nate after the game about it specifically, there's one line he brought up that I put on Twitter, and you can see what he said on Twitter about the incident. But he said, I just didn't want my brothers to give up on me. Now, when he uses the word give up on me, that seems like he's saying that Kenny at that point was giving up.
Right.
And I kind of followed up on that, and he stressed that no, he didn't feel like any player was giving up. But it just strikes me how three times he said, I did not want my brothers to give up on me. So there's something there that he didn't like, and it's alarming. And that is alarming word from Nate, even though he sort of extinguished the whole incident.
Well, and that's what happens when you're 7-3 after winning 20-some games in a row. It's kind of, and I think it's the same for fan bases. They're not accustomed to losing. When you have the 2 years that you did in 2017 and 2018 without a regular season loss, with all the noise that came with that about respect and and things like that, when you lose a game, people aren't going to handle it well, Brian. I mean, it's not a perfect world. To expect perfection behavior-wise from fans who are, it's short for fanatical, and even from young players. Or remember, these players are still 18 to 22-year-olds. I think to expect them to handle things well at that age when they're not accustomed to losing, I think we're probably a little naive to suggest that everything's going to be handled perfectly on all sides, right?
Right, and I look, none of us expected this, right? We did our preseason picks before the year. I don't think anybody on this site said that they were going to lose 3 games. I think we all had them going at least 10-2 before the bowl. So 3 games at this point with 2 games to go in the regular season, it's certainly a shock to all of us. It really is. However, please, if you are a fan of this team, and we all are, we write for a fan site. Let's be honest, we're writing for a fan site. Know that this is how life goes for 97% of college football programs. I think in the last 3 years or 4 years, there are only 4 programs that have not experienced a 3-loss season, and those are Oklahoma, Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama. Please understand that this happens to every other team in college football, even UCF. Even after they go undefeated, they are going to have seasons in which they go 9-3 or 8-4 or, God forbid, 7-5, and it will happen, and it's going to suck. But you can't then just say blow it all up. It's the apocalypse. You really have to sort of roll with it. There's going to be up years and there's down years. This team will have better years than this in the near future. I guarantee that. But this is not a great year. You got to live with it, though, because this is how every other program operates, too, unless you are the absolute cream of the crop, and that's just so rare.
Life lessons from Brian Murphy, folks, here on the Black Gold Banneret here. We'll leave it on that note. UCF on a bye this weekend. Football. Coming up, we'll recap UCF men's basketball. They're 1-1. Wins over Prairie View and Miami. What have we learned about this team, if any, through 2 games? Later in the show, we'll talk about men's soccer. They're hosting the American Conference tournament. They're the number 5 ranked team in the country. Do they have a shot at a top 4 national seed? We'll talk about that. And I'll tell Brian that, of course, we got the Black and Gold World Series in baseball. Something's going to happen there in the Black and Gold World Series that did not happen in the Major League Baseball World Series. 2 things, actually. I'll tell Brian what that is. That's all coming up on this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.
And welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Eric Lopez here with you alongside Brian Murphy. Jeff Sharon off. He's moving. Might be also excited because CM Punk is back in wrestling. So maybe that's why he's taking the show off. Or he's just very upset with volleyball losing to Cincinnati, which we'll get to later on the show. But right now, let's talk about men's basketball here, Murph. 2 games in to the season for Johnny Dawkins and his new ball club, and literally new. They beat Prairie View A&M Saturday by 4. And obviously everybody was kind of, before we kind of flip out about that score being close, Prairie View A&M was an NCAA tournament team last year, brings back some players from that, so they're going to win the SWAC. And then losing to Miami 79-70 on Tuesday night. So UCF 1-1 through 2 games. Magically, Murph, you made it to both games. You actually flew took a red eye or a morning flight from Tulsa to get to Orlando in time to be at Prairie View A&M. So you were there for the win, and then obviously was there through the late night for the Miami game on Tuesday night. What's been your impression of this team through 2 games?
This team has a lot of work to do. And they'll admit it, but they have a lot of work to do in terms of like really basic stuff. Just running your sets offensively, learning how to play together. Like they can. And Eric, you were there at UCF Basketball Media Day. They talked about how it's been great for them to play on in practice for the months that they've gotten and running their drills and their scrimmages and going to Spain and playing some exhibitions over in Spain against local teams. but nothing really compares to playing live action ball under the lights when it means something. And I think you're seeing a team that I think we kind of all expected, a team that has some talented pieces, no doubt, but they need a while to gel, and they have not done it yet. And it's only 2 games in, but it's going to be a while. And meanwhile, there's going to be a lot of peaks and valleys.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in both games, and I think the Miami game, looking back on that one, I think the big factors there, Colin Smith getting into foul trouble, eventually fouled out, only played 22 minutes. I think that's a big factor. I think they're going to, he's arguably your best player. If not, he's definitely your 1B player. And if he's not on the court a ton, you're going to struggle a little bit. And then the turnovers, which I think speaks to this team still trying to figure out who they are and learning to play with each other. They turned the ball over 17 times. Miami only turned it over 9 times. Miami has experienced guards. Miami turned those 17 turnovers to 21 points. I thought that was those two things were the big difference in the Miami game. Will you agree with that?
Absolutely. UCF, was only down. Actually, UCF fought back early in that game. We're down by 10 early. Fought back with some 3-pointers. This team shoots a ton of threes, by the way. They made some 3-pointers to take a small lead near the end of the first half. But then right before halftime, Dazon Ingram commits a turnover. Cameron McGusty for Miami, the Oklahoma transfer, lays it in at the buzzer, and UCF goes down by 1 right at the half. And that sort of foreshadowed everything that was to come in the second half, where there was just more sloppy play, more turnovers that lead directly to Miami points. Eric, I think there's a stat that talks about non-steal turnovers. So basically, turnovers you commit in which the opponent doesn't take the other ball away from you. It's basically just you doing dumb things like committing offensive fouls or throwing the ball away. UCF, I believe, has one of the worst rates. They actually rank 315th out of 350, I think 353 teams in the nation right now in terms of non-steal turnover percentage. Meaning they turn the ball over by just doing like unforced errors, just throwing the ball away, or again, they're pushing off. And so I think those are things that'll be cleaned up as they go further along. I think this team does have decent ball handlers with Dazon Ingram and certainly Cesar DeJesus doing more on the ball. Brandon Mahan, I believe, can work on the ball a little bit, and he's been a good player for this team. A guy we didn't even know would be eligible until right before the Prairie View game that Brandon Mahan is eligible, the Texas A&M transfer. So they have pieces. You can see how there is talent on this team. But it's going to take a while for all of this to really come together. And I think everyone, Johnny Dawkins included, the players included, I think everyone understands that. And they're not afraid to admit it.
I got to give you credit. You mentioned as we did our basketball preview show a couple episodes ago, and we talked about new face, guys that you think could make an impact. And when the guy you brought up was Darren Green Jr., and I've been impressed with him through the 2 games. You can make the argument that Darren Green was a big part of why they beat Prairie View A&M. When Prairie View A&M was pushing in the second half and UCF was struggling, Green brought that spark in the second half to get them the victory. And I thought he was good against Miami on Tuesday night. He had 13 points, tied for the team lead in scoring. He hit 3 threes, 5 of 9 from the field in just 20 minutes. Give you props. You called his name there. What was it about him that you liked, and what's been your thoughts on him here? Could we see an expanded role here for Darren Green moving forward?
I think you definitely could. I think that I don't know if Johnny wants to put too much on his plate this early. I think Johnny likes where they've got him now as a reserve sharpshooter. I don't think you're going to see him be moved in the starting lineup this quickly, 2 games in. But this is what he does, right? Darren Green might possibly be the best shooter on this team. And I think this team does have good shooters. Again, with Frankfurt, Matt Milan has not shot well early, but I'm really not worried about him. I think he'll come around and be fine. But it might be the freshman Darren Green who is the best shooter, and that's probably why, among all of the freshmen on this team, with Dre Ford and Tony Johnson, that he's getting the most run because he can impact this game offensively, in a split second. And this team sort of needs that shot in the arm. He has delivered in both the games. And I just think he's looked really good. He's not looked like a guy who is overwhelmed by playing in D1 ball, by playing against the ACC team. I thought the future was bright for him before he even played. And just to see how well he's played in his early going, He could be a legitimate star for this program pretty soon.
I don't think this team does not have the true scorers like an Aubrey Dawkins or a BJ that can get their own bucket, right? Like can get their own shot. But do they have more shooters on this roster than they did last year?
Probably. I mean, I think, it's interesting to see Cesar DeJesus now trusting his three-point shot more. That's been pretty big because, he's had a problem with that the last couple of years. But he's been more of a weapon on the outside. I mentioned, obviously, Darren Green, Matt Milan, and I think is only like 2 for 15 so far. Again, I am not worried about Matt. I think he'll be fine. Frank Burks is a good shooter. Dazon Ingram can shoot. Really, this team wants to shoot threes. There was a point in the Prairie View game in the second half where in 10 consecutive shot possessions, they were all three-pointers. They took 10 consecutive threes. This includes like Colin Smith and guys like that who want to step out and take threes anyway. So I think this team probably has more shooters. I don't know if any of them are as good overall as Aubrey, but certainly they have more weapons on the perimeter, and they want to spread you out and probably do more of the what basketball currently is, which is it's more up tempo. Which, by the way, this team is more up tempo. It's not Duke, but it's more up tempo. And then they want to spread you out and try to drain shots from the outside. If they hit hopefully hit 10 a game, then that's going to really help.
You mentioned Brandon Mahan. Big news there. We did not know if he would even play for this team this year. Tell us the story, the background there, because at least the public, we found out, I think it was right before tip-off, hey, he's good to go. He's going to play, and he did. He played well against Prairie View A&M off the bench. The transfer, just talk about that story.
Yeah, so Brandon Mahan is a guy who transferred in from Texas A&M, I believe, during the summer. I believe it was June. And so no one was really expecting him to be eligible this year. And I'll be frank, I am not exactly sure why the NCAA has, given him this waiver to play immediately. It just seems, you look at how the NCAA decides these things, and sometimes it can feel kind of random. But the fact is that he was made ineligible very shortly before the season began. It wasn't the same day. Now, the news broke. The news was broken by the program itself that Mahan was eligible against Prairie View. He was not, he was not officially eligible that day, but it wasn't more than a week before the season started that they actually knew he would be in the lineup and a part of the rotations, and that's great. He gave them a big spark off the bench in the first half against Prairie View. He looks like a guy who can really get to the rack and score. But I also, his inclusion does make it a little more difficult for Johnny Dawkins because, again, he did not know if they would have Brandon at all this season up until about 10 days ago, I think. So now you've got to work him in there. He hasn't really been a part of the game plan, and that's just another guy that you sort of have to figure out where he fits in all of this while you're sort of figuring out where anybody fits in all of this. I mean, there's so much that's nebulous about this team, and now you put another guy in there. It's not a bad problem to have because, again, he can score. But it's going to take a long time for this to sort itself out. And I'll be honest, it may not sort itself out until the very, very end of the season, in which case this team's season is already middling.
Well, and you mentioned earlier the stat about the unforced turnovers. Isn't that part of it too? Because you don't know the guy's tendency, right? Like a BJ and Aubrey play together for with practice and everything, so they kind of knew, oh, you're going to be on this spot or this guy's going to be on this spot. If you're not sure who's going to be where, or you're not 100% sure what to do, that's where sometimes unforced turnovers occur, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, Aubrey only played 1 year for UCF on the court, but he was here for 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? And, BJ was here for forever. Taco, same thing. I mean, these guys, were here for a long time. Chad Brown. And so now you've got a lot of new guys. We were talking about it last night during the game. There was a critical juncture in the game. And I think it was the second half. It was a close game. And you look on the floor, and you saw Cesar DeJesus. You saw Ibrahim Pamuke Doumbia, who, looks like a very athletic big, but really hasn't shown a whole lot as far as results yet, but looks like a very athletic big. And those are the two guys on the floor that were here last year. And Cesar was a reserve, and Doumbia was sitting out, I believe, as a transfer. So in a key moment, this team is basically all brand new. And it just kind of, again, we all knew it coming in, but to see it play out on the floor, you just see how this team is really starting from the ground up. And not in terms of experience. We've got experienced guys because of the transfers they brought in with Milan and Ingram. But just in terms of playing together in this setting with these guys in real time, in real action, there's not a whole lot of continuity here. And you're seeing that with turnovers. You're seeing that with some of the shot selection. And, again, I just think it's something that this team and this program and the fan base is going to have to deal with. And I think they understand this is going to be a pretty long process.
They go up now to Normal, Illinois to take on Illinois State. Of course, they played last year at UCF. UCF won that game, but everybody, if you're a diehard Knight Hoops fan, you remember the classic NIT matchup at Illinois State where UCF won. B.J. Taylor with a game-winning free throw in the final second for UCF to advance in the NIT tournament. That was the year UCF went on to the Final Four. They got to beat Illinois in the quarterfinals at home, but they beat Illinois State, who was a team that a lot of people that year thought was an NCAA tournament-worthy team. Great game. Well, they go back to that place to play Illinois State, 2 o'clock on Sunday, and then come back home to face a very good College of Charleston team Saturday, November 23rd at 2 o'clock, before, obviously, that same day that football is at Tulane, before they go out west to Anaheim, Brian, in California. And that's the thing. The only reason I bring that up is, while this team is learning who they are and they try to figure out what pieces fit in the puzzle, they're not playing cupcakes here.
No, certainly. You talked about Illinois State and Charleston. When they go out to California, they could possibly play Arizona in their second game.
They got Penn to open with, by the way. Penn, who beat Alabama to start the year.
Right, and really they're a big team out of the Ivy. They really are. They probably should make the tournament. So yeah, I get it. The slate of teams in the non-conference doesn't really have much name recognition outside of Miami and Oklahoma. But there are pretty good mid-major teams that this program is going to be facing, and you want that against a team that's still working the kinks out. But I really do hope that I believe in the first round, Arizona and Pepperdine are facing each other. If Arizona wins that game and UCF wins their opener against Penn, they would face each other in the second round, which would be on Friday, Black Friday, no less.
Yep.
And I would like to see that. I would just like to see them go up against another high major team way out west there and see how they deal with that. Because, in the end, you do want to see how your guys sort of match up with the power conference, or high major programs, as it were, like you did last night against Miami. They're not a very good ACC team, but they're probably on the borderline of a tournament quality team, and you want to see how that works.
No question about that. So we'll see how they continue to develop. And, of course, starting on the road this Sunday at Illinois State. Now, Brian's not going to stay with us for the rest of the show because he is prepping for what he has circled for. He's really circled this since it was announced, a couple months ago. And that's the Black and Gold World Series, which is the cap-off to the baseball fall ball season for UCF, who is coming off a dominant 13-4 win at Stetson on Saturday night, which you were not at.
No.
You missed a 14-inning game. Why are they playing 14 innings? Nobody knows, as we understand it. But nonetheless, they're going to play 3 games, the Black and Gold World Series, at the John, capped off on Saturday at 3 Eastern, where you and I will actually be at, celebrating this fall classic, if you will. I guess the question in softball, by the way, wraps up their fall ball as well. Now, I will speak on Brian's behalf on this because I've gotten questions about this because softball played Florida and Florida State and they lost. And it's like, what's going on? And I'm like, it's fall ball, people. Doesn't matter. And I think you can speak to this. Fall ball is a situation where baseball, and I think it's the same in baseball, and it is in softball, where you play a bunch of players and you throw them out there in different situations, and you're trying different things out. And while you are playing an opponent, you're also trying to figure out what each player in your roster can and cannot do and needs to work on, right? I mean, is that a fair assessment why you cannot take too much into results in fall ball, right?
No. Again, if you ever want to know about results in fall ball, just have Allen Iverson playing in the back of your head because we are literally talking about practice. We're talking about practice, not a game. Not a game. We're talking about practice.
Now, with that in mind,
yes.
What are you looking forward to seeing, or that you've seen? You've been to one game already when they played Stetson at home, and you're going to see them here at the Black and Gold Series. Do you look for specific players to see how they look? Or do you look for specific positions and who's playing where? What's kind of some of the things you're going to, just take a peek and not to make a big deal out of it, but just kind of, take a peek at some things that maybe you'll put in the back of your mind, maybe come the 2020 season gets going in February.
Right. I think, because the rules of the spring game are not regulation rules. Like, and we saw, of the spring game, oh my God, of the Black and Gold World Series, they're not usually regulation rules. We saw in their first game here, the John against Stetson, you had guys coming out of the game who could re-enter. You had guys who were fielding at times but were never batting. We played 12 innings for no reason because they wanted to get more innings in. So, as far as, who's playing where, I don't really care because that might just be for this fall and then they'll move on. What I would like to see, and what we have sort of seen, at least in the box score so far, is pitchers who were injured last year coming back and how are they progressing. And so, unfortunately, Eric, I was not able to make it, like I said, to the land on Saturday night because, yes, I was in Tulsa Friday night. I got out of the stadium at 1 a.m. Saturday. I went back to my hotel for about an hour. I packed up. I got on a plane flight at 6 a.m. to go back to Orlando. Took an Uber back to my house so I could change out of clothes, put on new clothes, and then drive out to the arena to watch Basketball at Prairie View. And then after that game was over and I wrote my story for it, I didn't feel like driving an hour north.
Oh, come on, Murph!
To watch baseball. I didn't. On 90 minutes of sleep, I did not feel like driving that far north to watch fake baseball. However, in those 4 hours and 23 minutes, I did miss. By the way, UCF won 13-4, which you wouldn't know if you went to their website because I don't think they have the score posted because again, the points don't matter in volleyball. They just don't. Don't worry about it. But however, you want to know how these injured pitchers are coming along. And I asked Coach Lovelady about this after the first testing game a couple weeks ago. And talked about how everybody's sort of on track for opening day, and you sort of saw this in the second game. Joe Sheridan got the start, pitched 2 innings. David Litchfield, coming back from Tommy John surgery from 2 years ago, pitched a little bit last year, had some other injury complications, but he pitched an inning. Nolan Lepkowski pitched 3 innings, struck out 4, gave 1 run. Trevor Holloway, who was the big-time starter for them last year, ended the year on the shelf due to bicep tendonitis. He comes in, pitches 2 innings. It's just good to see these guys on the mound. I mean, that's the main point. I really don't care what the box score looks like, what they did statistically. You want to see them throwing freely with good velocity, good movement, and I think that at least we can trust what Lovelady says about these guys coming along and being ready because guys like Sheridan, Lepkowski, Holloway, they were not available at the end of last season. They were all injured. So that's a big sign and something I'll continue to watch for this weekend. I'll be out there probably Thursday, like you said. I'll be out there Saturday for the finale, but I'll probably out there Thursday tomorrow afternoon just because why not? I mean, I'll be on campus anyway. I'll be on campus anyway doing football interviews Thursday morning. So the game's at 3 on Thursday afternoon. I might as well just stick around for a few more hours and catch some baseball. Why not?
That's right. So for many of you that are listening to this episode, that's why Brian right now is at baseball stadium right now. And that's why he's not sticking around for the rest of the show. But that is a real encouraging sign about the pitching because that's probably has to be one of the strengths for this team in 2020, doesn't it? I mean, we're going to have so many questions about this offense with so many new faces. To have stability pitching-wise and have quality, hopefully, arms, I think is a big factor for this Greg Lovelady team in 2020, which is not that different than softball, who also has a lot of new faces, and I think will have a lot of new starters position-wise. And I think their experience, you got a senior in Aaliyah White, and then I think they got a transfer pitcher from Boise State's pretty good, and they got Brianna Vasquez, who was had a great rookie year last year, freshman year. So I think this might actually be a deep softball pitching staff, but they're going to have a lot of new faces probably offensively, and they have to improve offensively. I kind of feel baseball's in a similar boat where there's going to be a lot of new faces that you hope can improve this offense, but in the meantime, you need that stability, and that's got to come from the pitching, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every Lovelady team in the 3 seasons that he's been here has really been built on pitching and more so built on bullpen. And so now, if you get somebody like Nolan Lakoski back, who was out all last year with TJ surgery, and Jalen Whitehead has made strides this year as well. You couple those guys with the guys who are coming back in the bullpen. That's really critical for this team to be successful. Not just, we can talk about the starters and seeing what Joe Sheridan's role is. You would like to see him come back, certainly, and obviously Trevor Holloway will factor big time in the rookie rotation. But for this team to be successful, or really for Lovelady to think this team can be successful, he has always built a overpowering bullpen with like 4 or 5 dependable arms. And you hope that they have that for this season. And so far, it looks like the guys who were banged up, the guys who were hurt at the end of last year are coming along well. And we still have 3 months away till the season starts. So at this point, all signs point to, these guys being all systems go come February, which is good news for this team, obviously.
Thursday's game, if you're listening on the 3 o'clock, Friday, 6 o'clock, and then Saturday, 3 o'clock at John Giuliano Park. Check out a little baseball before February. Should be fun. Murph, you'll get to see, I think you're going to see 2 things at the Black and Gold World Series. And if anybody goes out there, I'll be there Saturday. You're going to see 2 things that will happen that did not happen at the Major League Baseball World Series, where the Washington Nationals beat the Houston Astros. Number 1, a home team's going to win. That's number 1.
Yeah, I knew that joke was coming. I knew that was coming.
And number 2, we don't have to worry about any of the teams stealing signs with video. Thank you. There you go. Just take a shot at the Astros.
Badoosh.
Murph, tell the audience where they can find your work and what you got coming up.
Oh, I'm on Twitter. I mean, really, when am I not on Twitter? It's @Spokes_Murphy. If you listen to this podcast, you know by now. You probably follow me. So there's that. Am I selling this well? I will be writing about the Black and Gold World Series after it ends over the weekend. Sort of giving you a recap of not the games themselves, but really what have we learned? Who maybe stepped forward as a guy who impressed in this fall area, who can carry that over into spring. Basically, where are we at with this team right now in November? I'll be doing that. And then, because it's a bye week, Eric, I don't know, man. I might just be sitting back and watching movies. I might disregard football for a full weekend, which I'm kind of looking forward to. Yeah.
You mean you're not going to be like Jeff following that South Florida-Cincinnati game, kind of, figuring out the mathematics if Cincinnati were to lose out and UCF win out and win the division? No, not going to do that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how much I do not care about college football this weekend. I really don't.
Oh my God! So maybe you'll be tweeting about the Black and Gold World Series, though. That's
I will be doing that. I care about exhibition baseball.
There you go.
No doubt.
There you go. Well, enjoy that, sir. I'll see you there on Saturday. Thanks for joining me, and like I said, I'll see you Saturday from the Fall Classic, Game 3. The 2 magical words come fall ball. Back with more of the Black and Gold Banneret. The number 5 ranked team, UCF Knights men's soccer, hosting the American Conference Championship. Where do they stand for the NCAA tournament projections? Plus, women's soccer season comes to an end. What does that all mean? That's all coming up as we wrap up this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret.
SMU's, obviously, we've met them 3 times in a row in the final. So they're a top team, and they work so hard. They've got such a strong mentality, and I think it's going to be a great game. It's obviously going to be a great game, and I think our guys look forward to it. I think their guys look forward to it. I think it's a rivalry now. I think officially, if you play a team 3 times in a final, that's got to be a rivalry. So, it'll be a great game, and I think we're all looking forward to it.
And welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. That was Scott Calabrese on Wednesday night, courtesy of the American Digital Network, following UCF's dominant performance, 5-0 victory over Temple, led by Cal Jennings, who was named Offensive Player of the Year in the American, scoring a hat trick. And it sets up the matchup, as Calabrese talked about, the matchup we've all been waiting for on Saturday night, the American Conference Championship match, number 5 ranked UCF in the United Soccer Coach poll, and top 5 ranked team as well as in the top drawer soccer poll, taking on SMU, ranked in the top 10 as well. Huge implications. How big the implications are, that's some of the questions we're going to try to address right now, ladies and gentlemen, with a returning guest. Our good friend Travis Clark from Top Drawer Soccer joins us. And Travis, welcome back to the show. This is the best time of year now in soccer.
It is. It's also a very busy time. Although in some ways it's not, because there are less games in both the men's and women's D1 seasons as what we're trying to cover. But, it's definitely the most exciting because you see the intensity of, whether it's conference tournaments or NCAA. While intensity doesn't always equal pretty soccer, there's something about adding that competitive edge to the game that makes, and then maybe a little bit about the crisp weather, at least up here in the DC area. Like, you guys probably don't have that same sort of like fall vibe down in Florida, but regardless, it's an exciting time of the year, and it's exciting to think about the American Conference being decided between its two best teams this Saturday night.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I won't mention that we had a big cold front that dropped it down to the high 60s, but we'll get to that. Oh. Well, I'll just move on from there. Let's, Matt, talk about the actual match. All right, so UCF SMU, no surprise, this is the American Conference Championship match. What's your initial thoughts on this matchup? SMU had to go through double overtime to beat South Florida. There was a controversial, looked like maybe a hand goal that wanted for SMU. It's not reviewable. That knocked the Bulls out, so SMU gets away that way, whereas I mentioned UCF blew out Temple 5-0. What's your impressions and your thoughts on this mega matchup here of these two top 10 teams here?
Well, we can only hope that it's a repeat performance of the meeting back on October 6th when they tied 3-3. Up to that time it was in Dallas, though, and as UCF has home cooking this time, and last time I was on the podcast, I talked about the team's defense being a little bit better, and you got to see that at least for one night against Temple. Obviously, in the final game of the AAC season, needed overtime against a less than stellar Cincinnati team. So I think that's why this matchup excites me the most. Is you have two teams that have plenty of attacking quality, and it's not that they're ropey at the back, but the way they kind of play and open things up, there are goals going to be in this one. And as much as it can be an exciting time of year in college soccer, it can also be a dour, less attack-minded approach taken by a lot of teams. So I think that's why this matchup for me has so much compelling. You have the two senior forwards who are probable, whatever the MLS draft ends up looking like, you think that Garrett McLaughlin and Cal Jennings will both be first-round picks, and they're two like talismanic goal scorers that have earned a bevy of awards during their college soccer careers, and I think that adds a little bit more of a one-on-one luster to the program versus program matchup, and then you sprinkle in all the goals that could be scored, and if there's one match that a soccer fan, there's one men's college conference final to watch this weekend, it's got to be this one. Now, granted, I'm going to go ahead and say all this, and it'll be a 1-0 game or something, which I don't think would happen, but knowing my luck and prognostication ability, could very well come to pass. So it's definitely one that I'm going to try to make a very, very strong effort. I watched bits and pieces of both games last night. Less compelling of a matchup in the second game between Temple and UCF, but we saw what Cal Jennings does best. So I'm looking forward to seeing what these teams put together after that first matchup where they combined for 6 goals.
Yeah, and what an up and down. These are two of the top offensive teams. They like to shoot. I mean, it should be as entertaining as it gets. And you mentioned the 2-star players, Garrett McLaughlin and Cal Jennings. And it's an interesting comment you just made. I want you to expand a little bit on this because I know you cover this as well on Top Soccer Drawer. You mentioned you think they both could be first-round draft picks in the MLS. That's been something that locally people have been wondering about Cal Jennings' chances of making it to the MLS in the next level, and we just weren't sure. But you're pretty high on him. Just talk about how that process works, because some people have been wondering about that for Cal's purposes on his next step there. And I think I'm with you on McLaughlin. I've been super impressed every time I've seen him, so that's interesting. Expand on that.
Well, yeah, I think it should be worth pointing out that given the way soccer varies from other sports, that being a first-round pick in MLS means far, far less than it does in other, your other major collegiate sports, specifically for the NBA and NFL drafts. Like, that's not, you're not even guaranteed a spot on the roster. In some cases, you're handed an extended tryout, and there was a little bit of a trend, Buck, this past season where a couple of senior guys, the MLS Rookie of the Year was Andrei Shinyashiki, who you guys down in Orlando might know from his days at Monfort Academy, but he played 4 years at Denver University before getting drafted by the Rapids in the first round, and he actually went on to make an impact. Now, the case of attacking players, getting enough chances and enough minutes to make an impact in their rookie years and beyond is part of the issue, because MLS teams are building from a variety of different pathways, whether it's their academy or looking abroad to bring in players. And so, if you see someone like Cal picked in the first round, he's got a long ways to go to actually making appearances and contributions to his team. But I know that scouts that I speak to are high on him, and he's done this in back-to-back years, which will help him. And then, for Garrett, I know that this is a UCF podcast, but, he's worth mentioning as well as somebody who had some serious injury issues last year that kind of sapped his numbers, but he's back. He's 15 goals, 5 assists. And then, scoring goals is obviously very different too in MLS versus the college game. But, for these guys, if they get picked up by teams that have an USL size, or maybe they go on loan, that could be an avenue to developing and eventually becoming, a regular in MLS or something to that effect.
I'm glad you mentioned both of them. Trust me, here in where the market, where Orlando City had another long year, we're just grateful to see talented soccer players that could put the ball in the net on a consistent basis. That we don't know how that feels in the MLS over here in this market. So trust me, we're pretty pleased. All right, let's get into now this matchup. We've talked about the keys to this matchup, but what's at stake for both of these teams? And when I say that, obviously the conference championship, but I'm talking big picture here. Selection Monday is just around the corner here this week after this weekend. What is at stake in this match for both UCF and SMU from that standpoint?
Yeah, it's hard to know 100%. Obviously, both are going to be in the tournament. They're both sitting in the top 10 in RPI. And it's really hard to know each scenario what the implication will be. If we're talking specifically seeding, I think both will be in the top 8 of the college bracket, and that would give them, a couple of games here or there. I want to say that the winner would probably get a top 4 seed, and that, with that comes basically they would host between, from the second round on through to the College Cup, which is obviously at a neutral location in Cary, North Carolina this year. But it's hard to know that 100% that if, let's say SMU wins, they'll get the top 4 and UCF won't. I don't think both would get that, but I think both are going to be in the 4 to 8 range, let's say. And, particularly with Clemson and Virginia, the outcome of that final, the ACC final, that could have implications as well, since both of those are top 5 RPI. If Clemson, let's say, loses to Virginia, does then SMU win and move ahead of UCF, and they both get top 4? There's a lot of scenarios and permutations that are hard to make this kind of, it's hard to make it ironclad and speaking to the result directly leading to X, Y, or Z. But I do think you win the game. If you're UCF, you win the game, you're SMU, the chances of a top 4 seed are high. So in the I know that I'm throwing a bunch of words at it, but it's let's just say the winner will get a top 4 seed and call it like that, even if it's not necessarily 100% what it would happen, because you just can never really know. If that all makes sense, I hope it does.
Well, yeah, not only this makes sense, but what you said, I think when the last time you were on here, you warned everybody, hey, the committee might be very friendly towards the ACC.
Right.
And we saw that when they had their initial rankings out on November 1st, kind of a preliminary, kind of a preview, and they had 3 ACC teams in the top 5 in the rankings there. They had Virginia, they had Clemson, and they had Wake Forest. Right. Is that really the biggest threat to UCF, and for that matter SMU, is that the likely is that the committee might decide, hey, we're just going to go with 3 ACC teams in the top 4 national seeds, especially if Clemson were to beat Virginia and win the ACC tournament?
Yeah, I do think that Wake Forest, because they lost to Virginia, and you can't have 3 teams in a title in a tournament final, you would hope that the committee would at least get one of the American programs a top 4 seed. But again, you're never going to know. And I could, there's definitely a plausible scenario where, let's say UCF wins, as a hypothetical, they could definitely end up there at a 5 through 8 seed. That's not out of the realm of possibilities. Georgetown is in the Big East Conference Tournament Final. They were the regular season champions. So you think they're going to be in that mix for a top 4 seed assuming they win on Sunday against Providence. I don't necessarily think the Big Ten that Indiana gets into that top 4 mix, even if they win the Big Ten tournament. And then obviously, the Stanford, University of Washington, Pac-12 leaders, they're kind of in the 1-2 battle going into the final weekend. I'm not sure if they're going to be in the mix as well. So it's probably going to be, you're looking at the ACC programs and how they're viewed, and then Georgetown. Let's say Georgetown loses and the SMU, that would probably guarantee an SMU or a UCF winner gets it. But it's again, I don't want to speak in guarantees and get everyone's hopes up just because I've seen it before.
Well, especially with a committee. You just as we'll get into with the women's soccer, because I'll ask you about that, what your thoughts were, what they did there with the American Conference teams. Sometimes it's very interesting what they did there. I want to ask you about Wake Forest because they lost in the semis to Virginia. They did not win the regular season or the ACC tournament. However, I guess their argument they're going to make is they beat Clemson when they played in the regular season, and they did beat UCF in the opening match of the year. Does that, do you think, play a role at all with the committee in this as far as the head-to-head, or is that just an isolated database and there's a bigger picture there?
I'm not even 100% sure. The sort of mechanisms have never really made sense to me with the RPI. I do think that it could come down to a head-to-head matchup like that, but I think if UCF wins, it'd be very curious to see. I'm honestly very curious to see what all the scenarios could be behind the scenes, because it's not that it's mysterious, but it just confounds logic sometimes. So maybe it confound logic, and UCF wins the tournament. But they for some reason are below Wake Forest in the rankings just because of the way the numbers are crunched or whatever. So, I don't think it should be taken personally, though, if they end up doing it. Maybe be a motivating factor for the team if they see that they're slightly below where they think they should be.
We're nitpicking. I think that both teams are, and I think all the coaches would tell you, hey, obviously we'd prefer to be a top 4 seed, but at the end of the day, you got to play well regardless.
Yeah, you got to win your games, and whether you're home or away, and at some point, if you're a 5-6 seed, maybe you end up hosting all your games anyway. And
right, upsets tend to happen.
And if you want to win a national championship in one of these two programs, I'm sure that's the goal at this point for both these programs, even though they may not be in like the inner circle of contending programs, at least by some people's view. They got to go out and win the games and get the job done. It's not going to matter what your seed is.
Agreed. And you could be worse. You could be a situation like South Florida, who's on the bubble, not even knowing if they're going to make the field. They lose in double overtime to SMU in the semifinals. Temple, I know you talked about possibly being in the bubble, got blown out by UCF. How many teams do you think the American will get into the field?
At this point, you'd have to think that 3 is going to be their max. It's, like you said, South Florida's on the bubble. Temple probably had to win that game, or at least lose it a lot closer, or maybe draw and lose on PKs. But it's hard to see. They picked up a nice win against Louisville, but it's going to be pretty hard for them from where they're sitting to get into it. They played a tough schedule, and credit should be given to them in that capacity. But it's really hard to project. I still think they're not like totally done by that result, but I don't think it's going to do them a lot of help, because if that's the last data point of the season that the committee is working with for Temple, like, oh, you played against this, top 5 RBI team and you lost 5-0. Well, we're going to go and give this last bid to maybe the team that's 1 or 2 below or 1 or 2 ahead of you in the RPI that picked up maybe a conference tournament final loss or something to that effect. You look at, or maybe even you get the ACC bias will come back. It's like, well, do we bring in Temple, or do we give like a Pitt, a Syracuse, or an NC State one of these spots instead, because they're in a more difficult conference and that sort of bias comes into play. So, you've seen teams, I think there was one year where Charlotte was left out of the tournament a couple years ago, and they were in the teens in the RPI too, and I kind of defied logic a little bit. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out for Temple. I think, 3 is probably the max. South Florida, I would say, gets in, especially they had the 2-1 overtime loss. They played really well in that last data point, for lack of a better term. I think that helped boost their case way more than what we saw from the Owls in their final game, or what could be their final game of 2019.
Yeah, and finished as the third place team when whereas Temple was in the middle of the pack in the league. Certainly also could sway that to the Bulls' favor. We'll find out on Monday. So that's the story on the men's side. But I want to give you a couple quick questions before I let you go about the women's tournament. That was announced on Monday. 2 teams from the American. I want to ask you about this because there was a lot of anger on social media. Michael Kelly, the athletic director of South Florida, upset because South Florida is going on the road in the opening round to play Florida instead of hosting. I'm not as shocked by that. South Florida was a bubble team going in. I was more shocked, Travis, with Memphis, a team that has been ranked most of the year, top 25 in all the major polls. You guys have had them ranked. They won the regular season title, and they are going on the road as a reward to play at Washington State. What did you make of that? Those decisions by the committee?
Well, I think that sort of best sums up why I was throwing all those caveats and uncertainties when talking about the fate of UCF for SMU, right? Mm-hmm. You have Memphis. Yeah. Granted, the RPI is not enormous, but to send them all the way to Pullman, Washington for their first round matchup for a team they're ranked ahead of in the RPI is kind of. I mean, there's literally nothing that you could say that would explain that and sum it up. So I honestly don't have any idea how to explain it or break it down, but
because it makes no sense, right? That's why it's hard to explain.
You saw the season that Memphis had. You saw the season. I think South Florida has a little bit less of a bone to pick. They're playing their in-state rivals, but sure, Florida has not had a great season. That's a much better matchup for me, at least, that's a much better matchup than what Memphis was dealt as the conference tournament champion to boot. So that confounds all logic. And, hopefully Memphis can find a way to get that result, but that is a tough ask. And I think something similar happened in the opposite way recently, where Washington State had a pretty good year that had to fly all the way to UCF and ended up actually knocking them out. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Yeah, no. Trust me, that's a bad memory you're bringing up, Travis. That was 2017. UCF, Coach Sahadak had a dominant team, steamrolled through the American. It was a national seed, and the reward was getting a Washington State team as a bubble team right there in the opening round. And it was an own goal. I was there at that match. Early in the match, UCF dominated the match, but it was an own goal. And that's how Washington State advanced. And that year, they ended up going all the way to, I believe, the Sweet 16, I want to say, or even Elite 8 that year for Washington State. So, yes, that trust me.
I didn't mean to bring up bad memories, but there's a long track record of confounding things happening to that effect when talking non-revenue sport. I mean, you have people up in arms about obviously the bigger sports as well, the football, the basketball, baseball, I'm sure. But the thing it's just notable that it's going to happen no matter what, and it's good to have people talking, and I guess to have something good to talk about. I'm sure that the players and the coaching staff are less enthusiastic about the prospect, specifically of traveling for all the way to Pullman, Washington, and probably dealing with some snow and very, very cold weather coming their way.
Yeah, it's insane. It's just quite crazy. Let's hope on this Monday that the men's selection committee does a little better job on that, and you don't have that crazy of kind of selections, but you never know. And one thing we know for sure is that you guys will be breaking it down on TopDrawerSoccer.com. Busy time, as you mentioned, signing days in NCAA soccer. You guys break that down. Just tell us a little bit right now. This is one of the busiest times of the year in soccer for a lot of reasons. Just tell us about where they could find your work and what's on right now at TopDrawerSoccer.com.
Yeah, we are in full postseason mode, whether it's men's or women's D1. Obviously, that's the focus for us. But check out topgirlsoccer.com. Follow me on Twitter at Travis M. Clark, or follow our website at Top Door Soccer on all the social media accounts.
Travis, thanks again for joining us here. Enjoy the rest of the weekend and Selection Monday and the postseason. It's the best time of year, and keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Thanks, anytime, and enjoy that game on Saturday.
And thanks again to Travis Clark from Top Drawer Soccer for joining us here on the Black Gold Banneret Podcast, breaking down the men's soccer picture. Let's get through a few things here before we wrap up. Women's soccer, we touched on that with what happened in the conference tournament with Memphis and South Florida getting shipped out. Two-bid league from the league in the American and women's soccer. Of course, UCF not making it. They were eliminated in the semifinal of the American Conference semis in Memphis, lost to South Florida 2-1. So their season comes to an end for Coach Sahadak and the Knights. And kind of a unique season for them. They go 11-4-4. Pretty good record. However, the RPI kept them out. The RPI was at 93. This was a down year in the American and women's soccer. They were ranked 9th, so you didn't get a lot of quality matches really in the league outside of Memphis and South Florida. And it's some things that kind of hurt the team this year from making the tournament, their schedule strength. Some of the teams they played, like for example, Arizona State had a down year. UCF beat them 4-1. Arizona State was a 136 RPI. Ohio State, a team that was figured to be near the top of the Big Ten, had a down year. They had a 170 RPI. West Coast trip, UC Irvine and Long Beach State had bad years. Both were in the 200s in RPI. Those are things you can't control. You just, how do you know type of thing. I think if it certainly, as they look back on their season, the results they're going to probably kick themselves about. There was that stretch where they had a draw early in the year at George Mason, 2-2. That really hurt them because George Mason's RPI was in the 200s. Temple, they had a draw with Temple, a scoreless tie, as well as Connecticut. Temple's in the 200s, UConn in 140 RPI. That hurt them a little bit. The loss at Cincinnati, 145. All that, I think, contributed to them missing the tournament. I know people have been kind of messaging us here, Black Gold Banneret, me and Jeff, about what does that mean for the program. And, let me get this straight. I think that everybody in that program, knowing them, Coach Sadik, they should be the first to tell you they're disappointed they didn't make the tournament. That's the standard. That's the bar, obviously, at women's soccer. But there were some unique circumstances with this team. It's a little weird, considering even before the season, you had two of their top players. They're coming into the season. They were without two of their best players. Dina Orgeman and Stephanie Sanders both decided to play professionally, go pro, and played over in Europe. Those are two of their top playmakers. They were both sophomores, and by losing them, there were a lot of people that cover soccer on a consistent basis that thought UCF would have a rebuild year, that they would probably be a middle-of-the-pack team. And really, I think it's a credit. This is a young roster, especially on the back line. You didn't know what you were going to get at goal with a new goalkeeper. And instead, what you found out is Caroline Delisle is a stud, a redshirt freshman from Tampa. She'll be back. Olivia Lewis, a freshman out of Cooper City, Florida, in the back line plays well. You lose Kanya Plummer, who was the Defensive Player of the American Conference of the Year. And, something is mentioned, she didn't play in the conference tournament. She got hurt at the last regular season match on Halloween against South Florida. Did not play against Houston. Did not play against South Florida due to that injury, and that hurt them a little bit. So that kind of hurt their progress a little bit. But this is a team that's got a lot of players coming back. Olivia Lewis, Olivia Smith, I thought in the back line did a really great job with Delisle. This was a number one defense in the American, only allowed 3 goals in the regular season. And they're going to be back defensively strong. You got up front players like Ellie Moreno, who really showed what she could do, scored some goals big late, scored the game winner against South Florida in the regular season finale. She was just a freshman out of Winter Park, Florida. Kristen Scott, one of their leading goal scorers. She was just a sophomore out of Orlando. She returns. And you got talent like Allie Gudorf, who's just a freshman. Sonia Holman is just a freshman, played this year. Elise LeGroot, a sophomore. I'm just reading you. Matilda Cack, who's a defensive player, just a sophomore. This was a team, Diana Martin, who really scored a couple goals in the win against Houston in the conference tournament. She's just a sophomore. So this is a team that had a lot of youngsters, freshmen and sophomores. They're going to have a recruiting class coming in. I think next year they're set up to have a big year and a bounce-back year. And keep in mind, South Florida graduates their greatest player of all time in Vians, who's the American Conference Player of the Year. So they're very grateful about that. So I understand some people kind of disappointed. They're disappointed, but there was a lot of youth on this team, a lot of questions. And, again, they lost arguably their two best players that was supposed to be on this team. And I shouldn't say supposed to, because every sport you lose players that decide to leave early for professional sports. But you had this situation here with women's soccer. So I just wanted to share that, since a lot of people have been talking about that women's soccer season coming to an end. Quickly to other notes, volleyball finishing up the regular season this weekend. They're at Temple and at UConn. They lost the big showdown match against Cincinnati on Sunday in 4 sets. Tight first 2 sets, the team split, and then Cincinnati really raised their level of play and went on a big-time run. They outscored UCF, as a matter of fact, during that stretch at some point to a 44-23 run. They won the third set 25-14, led like 19-9 in the fourth set. UCF made a run in the fourth set but came up short. So Cincinnati is a win away this weekend, or win away, or a UCF loss away from locking up the regular season championship and the number 1 overall seed for the upcoming inaugural American Conference Volleyball Championship that will be held at UCF November 22nd through the 24th. Should Cincinnati lock up the regular season title, remember they have the tiebreaker, so they have a 1-game lead with the tiebreaker. They just need one win. UCF will be locked into the 3 seed for that conference tournament. And in that scenario, remember because the top 2 seeds go to the division champion winners. The West is still yet to be decided. That's going to come down to the last match. But you have the East pretty much settled with UCF and Cincinnati situation there. UCF will be at Philadelphia, then at UConn, trying to improve their resume. They're 19-7 overall on the season, 12-2 in the conference. And they just, want to build strong. Right now the league's looking like a 2-bid league. UCF's in good shape. You don't want to have a setback that could put you in the bubble going into the conference tournament situation there. And they pretty much know. We already know who the 6 teams are going to be in the American Conference Championship. We just don't know who the seeds, what seedings they will have at this point. But we do know that Cincinnati, UCF will be there. SMU, who currently leads the West, with also Tulane and Houston also will be there. Houston and Tulane will make the trip to Orlando, and SMU will be certainly in the field as well. And that's kind of a crazy Western situation there that's going to come down to the wire with SMU near at the top, followed by Houston, Tulane, and then Tulsa. Tulsa is the other team that they will be making the trip to Orlando on that. Women's basketball dropped a couple decisions on the road, losing to Belmont. Pretty ugly score, 72-37. Belmont preseason pick to win the Ohio Valley Conference. And then losing to Florida Gulf Coast on Wednesday night, 72-50. Florida Gulf Coast has been a perennial power, by the way. They've averaged 25 wins or more the last 9 seasons there. Coach Smesko, in his 18th season there at Florida Gulf Coast, they've built a program that's been a power. They've been a perennial NCAA tournament team. They're usually seeded from that 9-13. They upset people. They love to shoot the 3. They're like the Golden State Warriors. They'll chuck up about 43s a game, and if they're hitting them, you got a big problem. And that's what happened on Wednesday night. Florida Gulf Coast hit 16 threes on Wednesday night, whereas UCF only hit 19 field goals, period. And it's tough to win that way. Florida Gulf Coast has a great player in Davian Wingate, who is the daughter of David Wingate, who was a longtime NBA veteran, played a decade in the league, was part of the Georgetown men's basketball national championship team in 1984. That's a very talented place. They're tough to beat in Fort Myers, and it was a tough one for Coach Abe and her team, as they've had some adverse results here on the road. Remember, it's a team that's got a lot of new faces. I think they're still trying to find their identity, especially defensively. That was one of the questions. No Nye Schuler. She graduated. In years past, Nye Schuler would probably get the assignment of trying to guard Wingate. Do they have that player right now? We don't know. It's still a young team. It's early, but certainly concern on the defensive side, giving up 72 points in back-to-back games. Perhaps a little alarming, but then again, when you have so many new faces, you kind of figure they might struggle early defensively. We'll see if they can salvage their road trip coming up on Saturday as they're at Stephen F. Austin. That'll be a 4 o'clock game tip-off from Stephen F. Austin before they come back home against Delaware on Sunday, November the 24th. All right, that will do it. But before we wrap up, some breaking news. Brian Murphy not with me on this segment. We recorded the segment with Murph earlier. Part of the reason for that is because on Thursday morning, Brian Murphy was part of the media that had a chance to talk to McKenzie Milton. McKenzie Milton speaking with the local media for the first time this year. We'll have more on this developing story in the coming days and a week. We'll talk more about this next week's episode on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. And we'll certainly have stuff up on the site, Black and Gold Banneret, as McKenzie Milton speaking for the first time to the local media. Here's a little snippet of what McKenzie Milton had to say to the media.
Well, I can't run yet, I can't jump yet, so, but, you know, in the near future, that'll probably be something that will be progressing, physical therapy. So, I mean, it's getting close to that point, and then I think I'll start stacking blocks, and, you know, it'll start to be like a little avalanche effect where, you know, I just keep getting better.
But sorry, Mark, one more thing. Yeah, you still feel optimistic, though, about your progress and how it's going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, 50% of these cases, you know, you don't have a leg, so I'm very optimistic. You know, my nerve feels great. I got full feeling in my foot, so I'm building up strength right now, so I'm very grateful. I got a little baby quad coming back, hamstring muscles are there, so, I mean, it's rolling right now, and, you know, I still got a ways to go. Like, I'm not, you know, saying I'll be playing next week or anything like that, but it's getting there.
Back in August, you said about how the nerve is 100% and you're just about building up strength. Since then, these last few months, what has been maybe the most encouraging goals that you've hit in these last few months in your rehab?
Being able to push some weight in some squats, pushing heavy weight in leg press, doing some walking lunges, stuff like that, just doing some more athletic movements and stuff like that. So, I don't know, just kind of feeling like an athlete again, I guess.
Where did Bridgewater's success this season for the Saints motivate you?
Absolutely. You know, I actually had Traquan get me in contact with him, just asking him, you know, how long did it take to have him feel normal? How long did it take to get him out of his brace playing? And you know, he's just, I mean, first of all, he's a God-fearing man, and, you know, and that's what he's harped on, you know, since he got hurt. And just seeing him ball out at the Saints is eye-opening. And other guys, Jalen Smith, you know, those guys had devastating, perhaps maybe career-ending injuries in some eyes, and, you know, they're two of the best players in the NFL.
Or how far have you come, and how far do you have to go?
You know, it's not necessarily a timeline right now. It's just kind of day-to-day, but I'm busting my butt, you know, while the guys are at practice in the weight room with David Young, one of our strength coaches. You know, he pushes me, Bam, and Alec Haller. We're all knee guys right now, and it's kind of cool just to have guys to lean on while we're both struggling. I mean, all three of us are struggling, you know, trying to get back right. So, but I mean, we're all pushing weight. We're all just, you know, just trying to better ourselves.
What is the next goal in your rehab that you're trying to reach?
And get this brace off. That's the next goal, and it should be some point in the near future I'll get this off. Just normal day function, then I'll move to a sports-specific brace.
What's the dream now?
Dream's the same. You know, I want to go to the NFL one day. I want to play football. And then I want to coach after that. You know, that's been my dream since I've been in high school. So none of that's changed. That's still the goal.
How much is this year being sort of a de facto coach change your perspective a little bit on what it means to be a coach down the line?
You know, they put in a lot of hours. I mean, just as a player, as a quarterback, you put in a lot of hours, but, you know, you don't get a lot of time with your family, which is hard. You know, I mean, us as players, you know, we're the coaches. We're an extension of their family. So just the sacrifice that they make, but, you know, that's something I'm willing to do.
Has it made you want it more now that you've seen it sort of up close?
I think so. You know, I mean, football's a beautiful game when it's done right. Honestly, I feel like it's a form of art when, you know, all 11 pieces are moving in the right way. And, you know, I've been around some great coaches, from Coach Frost to Coach Hype to Coach Levy. I mean, they're as good as it gets. So, you know, if I could emulate those guys when my time comes, it'd be pretty cool.
All right, that's just a snippet of this Thursday morning, this breaking news. It's breaking as we finish recording this episode of McKenzie Milton speaking to the local media for the first time. They spoke for about 15 minutes. That's just a little snippet of it. Make sure you go to blackandgoldbanneret.com. We'll have extensive coverage of this. Also, make sure you follow Brian Murphy at spokes_Murphy. He has going to post a ton of the video of that interview with McKenzie Milton as he spoke with a lot of the media there. Again, this is the first time we've heard from McKenzie Milton all year long. He was made available today, spoke for about 15 minutes, says he heard what he had to say about how he's feeling health-wise and still his aspirations to still play. So that is big news, developing story there. He also, in that 15 minutes, he talked about how he feels about Dylan Gabriel and how he's played and things like that. All of that, we're going to be covering that in the coming days and next episode of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Check it out, blackandgoldbanneret.com. Make sure you follow Brian Murphy. I'm sure he's going to have a write-up about it as well. And then break it down on spokes_Murphy for the in-depth video of McKenzie Milton. Speaking again, Thursday morning, media availability for the first time this year. McKenzie Milton, we're almost a year to that horrific scene and injury that he suffered on the Warren I-4 in Tampa against South Florida a year ago. And in a lot of ways, perhaps changed the direction of this program in that moment. But who knows? Maybe we'll see McKenzie Milton down the road. But that will do it for this episode on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. A little longer there with the breaking news. We wanted to make sure we get that in as McKenzie Milton speaks to the media on Thursday morning. Thanks to Brian Murphy, who joined us earlier. Thanks to Travis Clark from Top Drawer Soccer. Make sure you all hopefully come out to the soccer and track and field complex this Saturday night for what should be a magnificent match as number 5 ranked UCF takes on number 10 SMU in the American Conference Championship match. Perhaps with the win, UCF can earn a top 4 national seed. We'll find that out Monday at 4:30 Eastern on the Selection Show. So, for Brian Murphy, I'm Eric Lopez. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.